Hi, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to diagnose and fix an oil leak that is really common on the original 5-liter even fire V10 that came on the 2004 to 2008 pre-LP Gallardo. We're going to be doing this on my Superleggera, but the procedure is exactly the same for your car as well. So if you ever park your car in a garage and you notice that there's a huge oil stain underneath that's occurring right behind this back window, right at the firewall, this is a good indication that you have an oil leak in this area. So this leak in the front of the motor usually comes from two places. It either comes from this O-ring that I'm going to show you how to replace, or the front crankshaft seal. But by looking in the valley of the motor, you'll be able to determine if it's either the front crankshaft seal or this simple little O-ring. And although this O-ring is the primary thing that we're going to be replacing, there's also two gaskets that we're going to be replacing on the oil filter housing assembly. Unfortunately, if you diagnose this for your car, getting at these components is a little bit tricky. You're going to have to remove the entire intake manifold to get at these three gaskets that I'm going to show you how to replace. I detailed this in a previous video, and I'll link it in the card above where I go into full detail on how to remove this intake manifold and the fuel injectors and everything like that. So check out that video if you do have this issue, but I wanted to categorize this a little bit differently so you can access it a little bit easier. So in the V of the motor, this being the rear of the car and then over here being the front, we're going to focus on the oil filter housing assembly and this main oil pipe. So let's get this on the bench and I'll show you all the fasteners that you need to remove to get this out, and then we can go ahead and put it back in with new gaskets and O-rings. The oil filter housing assembly also has an integrated pressure sensor, so we're going to go ahead and unplug this first. So on the front of the oil filter tube, right at the front of the motor, there's two T30 Torx that we need to access. This one's obstructed by a little bit of wiring harness. Push that to the side and you'll be able to access this fastener. And on the other end of the main oil filter tube, there are 4 fasteners, one on each corner. And you can access 3 of these fasteners relatively easily with just a regular T30 socket. But the fastener on this side is almost inaccessible. So what I did to access this fastener was I used a regular T30 socket, a reduction, and then an extension. So I could actually get good physical contact in there, and it could help me avoid stripping it out. Before you remove this, I don't recommend cleaning in here at all. Once you remove this oil filter housing in the tube, oil is going to spill all over the place. So after we put the new gaskets in, we're going to go ahead and clean it. Okay. And once you remove this oil pipe from the car, be sure to locate the old O-ring that fits in this feature. Same with the other side. Be sure to locate the gasket that is mounted to this face. Now that we have the main oil filter tube out, we can focus on this assembly. And now we have access to this T30 Torx underneath that oil tube. So there's one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. And then on the top, there's one right here, one right here, one right here. And if this doesn't come off right away, just double check that you have all the fasteners out, and don't try to force anything. And now that we have everything removed, we can start focusing on cleaning all the features that are gasketed, all the faces and the assembly itself. So just make sure that there's no residue left on these surfaces or on the surfaces that are mounted to the engine itself. And the same goes for the oil filter tube. Make sure that this feature is nice and clean. And the same goes for this feature that houses the O-ring. Make sure that this surface is nice and clean and avoid any sort of residue that's left over on the left side that has a tendency to build up in the V of the motor. Don't let it fall into the galleys. You do not want that to happen. Once we're happy with how that looks, we can put the gasket right back on. Line it up, and then put the oil filter housing on. So what I recommend doing first is getting all the fasteners in first, just hand tight. So getting your socket and your socket extension and just twisting them until you can't twist them anymore with your hand. And then we're going to come back and do a final tightening torque on this oil filter housing. Can't find any sort of torque specification for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten this down to about 9 foot-pounds or about 110 inch-pounds. And I think that should give me enough clamping force on this thing to seal it properly. But I don't want to be too tight because then, you know, it's an aluminum block. So what I did is I just went in a star pattern and I started from the innermost fastener. So I started with this one, and then I went over to here, and then I came down and did this one, and then I went over there, and then I did this one over here, and then I came back and did this one, and then I did that one, and then I think I finished on that one. And then I think this one was the last one. So I fully seated the O-ring into the oil filter tube, and now we can finally reinstall it back into the car. I'm gonna place the oil tube in there, and then I'm gonna get the gasket and place it behind the tube. Then I can get the fasteners and put them in hand tight. And tighten the ones in the front down to 110 inch-pounds. Probably gonna do a star pattern for this. I'm gonna do the top right and then the bottom left, and then the bottom right, and then the top left. So now that we have all the new gaskets in, we can start cleaning all the oil that's stuck in the valley of this motor. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sop up as much oil as I can and then put everything back together. And then once it's back together, I'm gonna let the car run, and I'm gonna go in here with some engine degreaser and try to hose this area out. Like, I don't want any of the water to get into any connectors or anything like that, so that's why I'm not gonna put water in here at all until everything's buttoned up. So all automotive connectors, like in the engine bay, are gasketed. Like this one, you can see this purple O-ring around here. Connectors do have a high degree of ingress protection. There's no issues of running water over your engine bay. And what I like to do is have it running, so that way any water that wants to settle in the V of the motor has a chance to boil off once the engine hits operating temperature. So now that we have those old crusty gaskets out and the new gaskets in, everything's torqued down, we can finally put the intake manifold back on and start our car up. If this video helped you, please consider giving it a like. That way I know that I'm providing good content to you and I'm helping you the best way I can. So if you like this video, please do that, and until next time, thanks.